Hey guys, Mr. Hanley here, and we are in our second week of talking about arguments, arguing for God, arguing about God, arguing for the position of believing in God. And last week we were just discussing just generally the idea of God or no God and what that would mean, what that would change about things philosophically. Today we're going to talk about morality. We're going to talk about morality here. And so let's get into it. Um, First, what is morality? Let's talk about what morality is in case you don't know what morality is. Morality is another word for like ethics. If you don't know what ethics are, it's like right and wrong things, good and evil. Um, what morality can be defined as is like a universal moral code that applies to everybody. Universal meaning like it applies to everybody, and it's a moral code that says like these are good things to do, these are bad things to do, and it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't. Morality would say that there is a moral code out there that no matter who you are, no matter what age you are, boy, girl, whatever, there are certain things that are wrong no matter who you are. There are certain things that are good, and so that's what morality is. Um, you know, and so we have a pretty good idea what morality is. You know, on a daily basis, we have certain things that and I'm not talking about social cues, because there are certain things in society that we view in different ways that don't apply to morality. It's more etiquette. Morality and etiquette are two different things. Etiquette would be like what's acceptable in our society. Like, for instance, you know, at a dinner, a nice fancy dinner at one of those fancy restaurants with ties and everything that, you know, obviously we can't go to restaurants now. But if you're sitting at a fancy restaurant and you just kind of go burp and just burp really, really loud like a belch in the whole restaurant, people turn around to hear you. That would be like a poor etiquette kind of thing. Or like, let's say, you know, you're at again a fancy restaurant or something, and you just decide to put your bare feet up on the table and just, you know, take your socks and your shoes off and put your bare feet up on the table like right next to somebody's food. That is poor etiquette, right? Um, that's something that would be like, oh, that's gross, but it's not necessarily morally right or wrong, right? It has nothing to do with morality. So that's etiquette. There's a difference because those are societal norms and everything. We're talking about grander things, morality, right and wrong, and we all really do have a pretty good determination. See, etiquette can be different. Like you and I would be really surprised in other countries what different etiquette is. Like for instance, we wait in line and different things, but there are some countries where people don't wait in lines. You know, there is no waiting line. You just push to get to the front. Or there are some countries where the etiquette would be, you know, where some country you might wait for everybody to get their food, and if you eat any of your food first before anybody, it's rude, or you have to eat with a certain hand, or if you wipe your mouth in a certain way, it's rude. Those things we have no clue. All around the world, there's completely different etiquette. So that's not what I'm talking about. Morality is something that applies to everybody universally. And I'm saying we have a pretty good idea of the main parts of morality that are right and wrong. Like for instance, they're no-brainers. For instance, helping. Let's say there's a poor old lady who's this little old lady. She's a poor old lady who has groceries, and she has her bag of groceries, and she's walking out of the grocery store, and she trips and falls. Let's say, it's obvious. It's pretty much a no-brainer. Nobody here would be struggling to figure out that a good thing to do would be to go over and help her up and help her pack her groceries. It doesn't take a lot. Helping a poor old lady who just tripped over the curb, helping her up off her feet, helping her with the groceries, that's good. If that were to happen and you'd like laugh at her and then like steal her groceries and run away, that's pretty obvious that that's bad, right? We all agree on I don't think there's anybody who, other than joking around, I don't think there's anybody who really would think like, you know, I think the morally good thing to do would be like kick her eggs and milk down the sidewalk or something. Like nobody would think that that's a good idea. That would be a horrible thing to do, and that would be really bad. And so it's one of those things where a lot of times morality is really obvious what's the good things to do and what's the not so good things to do. So that's morality, like right and wrong, good and evil. So The real question here, the real thing that we're the heart of the issue when we talk about morality, though, is where does morality come from? If we all kind of have an idea of what is right and wrong, that there is this universal code, and it's pretty obvious. Like some people would say, oh no, that if somebody wants to argue with you, like there's no universal code of what's right and wrong. Let's say somebody says that. Let's say somebody comes up to you and says, there's no universal code of what's right and wrong. If your next step, which I don't recommend, is to just go and punch them right in the face, and all of a sudden they get upset and go, hey man, be like, hey, there's no universal code of what's right and wrong. I mean, you just said it. So you may think that's wrong, but I think it's right to do it, And they would obviously be very upset. And I do not recommend doing that because you could get in big trouble. But if anybody's honest, they would say, yeah, we universally agree on quite a few things that are wrong, that no one should do. And quite a few things that are right. Helping people, treating them with love, treating them with kindness. That's a universally looked at type of things. But we have to figure out, where does morality, where do these ideas come from? As Christians, we have the easy answer, because we can just say morality comes from God. God determined it. God said these things are good and these things are not good. And we can pass, and it actually really makes it easy for us because we can pass the buck. It's not like we have to sit there and argue with people and people go, you made stealing wrong, but I think it should be right. Let's negotiate about this, and you got to defend yourself. Why did you make stealing wrong? I think that was a bad decision. We don't have to sit there and go, well, stealing's wrong because of this, and that. We don't have to defend it because we didn't decide it. Because they say, I think stealing should be okay. Why is stealing a wrong thing? It's like, hey, don't ask me, ask him. He determined. It's not, and it's non-negotiable. He made these rules of what's right and what's wrong, and we don't have to worry about it. Because here's the thing: there's a lot of things that the Bible teaches are wrong, that people in society today are like, hey, that's not hurting somebody, or that's why do you have to be such a party pooper or whatever, and we can just say God knows what's good. God is our creator. He's determined what's best for us and what's the way that he wants us to live, and he said that activity or that thing is wrong for us. And though our current society might say that, no, that should be okay, or that should be this, or that should be that, our current society doesn't know anything. The morality of what is the relative morality of what's popular changes from society to society, and so what we think is okay and acceptable now, we can't impose on the Bible. We can't impose on God, because that's just what. I mean, think about how often in the Bible, guys had multiple different wives. You have Elkanah having Hannah and Peninnah. You have, Moses with Sarah and Hagar. You have David with his many wives. You have Solomon with many, 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 many wives. You have so many guys, and each time it was wrong, and God was saying it was wrong, but they weren't listening because that was what was currently acceptable in their society. And so, anyway, I'm kind of getting off on my point. But our morality for us as Christians is determined by our Creator. And our Creator knows what's best for us, and what is good has already been decided. And the most general things about morality are even put on our conscience. As young as babies, we would understand right and wrong in the general sense. Atheists, on the other hand, have a harder path. So Christians, we have a really easy path. Somebody were to say, you know what? Oh, you think there's such a thing as morality? Well, where does morality come from then? It comes from God. It's like not even it's not even a hard question for us. It's really easy. For atheists, though, it's a really hard question because they don't believe in God. They don't believe there is a greater being out there. And remember, we are arguing for the point of God. We're not arguing yet for the point of the God that we're familiar with, who has a son named Jesus and who sent him to die on the cross, the God of the Bible. We're not even arguing for the God of the Bible at this point in time, because that's several steps ahead. We're first just arguing that there is someone out there. That's why I entitled the first lecture last week as God or No God. Is God or no God? Is there a God out there or not? That's what the main argument that we're going to be studying these next couple of weeks is. And so the atheists, though, have a very hard time with morality. You have to ask them, where does morality come from? They have to come up with something different. They might say morality comes from our own sense, our own conscience. What we determine feels right is where morality comes from. And why do you think that's wrong? And obviously, there's some pretty obvious answers. Is that it boils down to having these big, important decisions. It kind of waters down all of the decisions to be just a matter of what you feel. Okay, what do you feel at this point in time? Well, I feel that murder is wrong. Okay, well, that's your own sense, but my sense is that it's not. And you can't tell me any different because it's my own sense. And you have your own sense. And so it would be kind of making them equal, these two statements. Murder is wrong. Black raspberry is the best ice cream. If we have our own sense, it's like, to me, black raspberry is the best ice cream. That's my own sense. That's my morality. That's my determination. And you can determine a different style ice cream. Well, murder is wrong. That's my sense. That's my morality that I'm putting out there. Well, you could determine something different. You see how it can, if it's your own sense, people have all sorts of different standards. People have all sorts of different opinions. And if it comes from your own mind, there's no consistent approach. You can't argue with somebody and say, hey, man, you can't do that. That's wrong. Somebody would be like, I can do it. I just determined it was right. And so you'd have no bearing to tell somebody that they're wrong about anything because it comes from their own sense. So that's one example of what an atheist answer could be, and you can see it's pretty obvious that it's shaky. Another thing that they can say is that morality comes from society. This is the more normal answer. Society, or the majority, determines morality. This is very shaky as well. It sounds okay at first because we're like, okay, society tells us these things are wrong. And again, we're talking about bigger things than etiquette, larger things than etiquette. Okay, society tells us these things are wrong and these things are right. Okay, and you might get a crazy person every once in a while who thinks crazy things, but for the most part, if you get a large enough group together, they're going to be all right. The problem is, throughout history, we can see that that's not the case. There are societies who have gotten together and thought that there are things that are plenty wrong. Oh, I'm frozen. Just stay with me. Keep watching the video. It'll come back eventually. For instance, in some societies throughout history, women were basically treated as property. I mean, you girls out there, I'm sure you would not appreciate being born in a different, hundreds of years ago in different societies than we are now. You should be very, very glad and feel very happy and privileged that you were born in America in the 21st century, or you guys are all born in 2000s, in the 21st century in America. It is a very good place for girls, because comparatively to other places, because other places, girls have been treated as worse than property in a lot of societies. There have been terrible prejudices against groups of people. There, terrible racism. There's been slavery, and I mean, even in some societies, hundreds or thousands of years ago, people would sacrifice babies to Molech. Think about how awful that is. They would Molech, the Molech worship. They would make a statue, and they would have these hands that they would heat up, essentially as a stone oven, and they'd throw babies on this oven until it was red hot, and the babies would die screaming, and they would use this as part of their worship. And obviously, you and I all think that that's so awful and terrible, and like it's really, really terrible, and it really is, because that is where the morality comes from. Morality comes from God and tells us that's terrible. But if you say morality comes from your society, then what you're saying is those societies back then that used to do those things, they're okay. They're because that's what they determined as a society, as a majority, was okay. Think about this, how crazy this is. We all think, well, those are ancient people, they didn't know any better. Well, according to, if you say morality comes from society or from the majority, what you're saying is, if I go to some secluded island or something like that, or some secluded land, and I get enough people to come with me, I can make morality be whatever I want there. I could say that, We can, murder all blonde people if we want, and say all blonde people are to be murdered and put to death. And I think we'd all agree, especially Ryan, especially you, would all agree that that would be a wrong thing to do. But if we as a society if that's where morality comes from, is from the majority in the society, we can we could do that. We could just set aside and say, determine something's right. Hey, we have a majority here. We can. You can't tell us this is a wrong thing to do. Atheist real answer. The only real answer and they, obviously an atheist, either of those examples I gave, the atheist would not go along with those. They'd try to find some loophole. But the real answer, the only real answer for a consistent atheist, if there's an atheist who is willing to be consistent, the real only answer they have is that there is no such thing as right or wrong. The atheist, if they're consistent, and they're logically consistent, there's not a lot of them, but there are some who are logically consistent atheists, will say, yeah, no, there's no such thing as right or wrong. They're societal constructs. They're just made up by society that wants to make us feel right or wrong about something. But yeah, there's no such thing, because obviously, in order to have such a thing as good and bad, you need a determiner of good and bad, and that person would be God. And so since they don't believe in God, say, if they're consistent, then there can't be a right and wrong. There can't be a good and evil, right? And so at least the good part is, at least they're consistent. If somebody were to come to me and admit that, I'd be like, okay, I feel like I can win this person over. I feel like I can have a good conversation with them, at least, because they are at least being consistent, which is very, very rare with this group. But think of how crazy that is. Think of how depressing that is. Think of how sad that would be if you get to the point of going, there is no God. What you are also admitting is there is no such thing as right or wrong. So that means that all those times you help people, all the times you do nice things for people, there's no point to those whatsoever. Anytime that you prevent yourself from doing something because you know it's wrong, well, there is no such thing as right or wrong. Who cares? I'm going to do it anyway. Think about living like that. You're such a selfish, self-centered existence that doesn't see anything for anybody else at all. It doesn't seek after anything for anybody else, and it's just it's just doing what you want all the time. It's just such a sick existence. And if you live like that, I guarantee you won't be happy. You will not be happy in that way. And that's the thing. Atheism does not lead to happiness. There are actually many, many atheists who want to be Christians and want to be believers in God because they know, because their life is so unbelievably empty. Atheists are not necessarily happy people. Many of them are, they go through a stage, a lot of them, where they're incredibly arrogant, and they think they know more than Christians. But if they've been an atheist for a long amount of time, a lot of times they admit that they're not happy and that they feel empty. And you might say, well, why don't they just believe in God then? It's usually some sort of hang-up that they have. They may have one life experience that they can't get over. I knew someone who had a family member close to them who was very, very sick, and they had in their mind, my family member, who is sick, if there was a God out there, how could he let this family member get sick like this? And so therefore I will determine that I will not believe in God. And we don't have time to get into that today, but there are a lot of good reasons. Primary of which, this is a fallen world. There's no guarantee that anything good is going to happen to us at all, no matter how good we are. In this world, terrible things happen. Coronavirus is just one of them. Terrible things happen. There's no guarantee that you're going to go through life without terrible things happening to you. But usually it's something like that. Something like that will, oh, hey, I'm back. Something like that will really hang somebody up, really catch somebody up on what they believe, and it'll just keep them from believing God. They want to believe in God. They want that hope. And I've even had somebody tell me before, several people tell me before, that thing you have, that belief that you have, I want that. And I'm like, well, you can have it. And they're like, I just can't. I just can't. I just got this, and they'll bring up that one little pebble. I just can't get over this, and it's almost like they're just determined to hang on to it. But you can see with the morality issue that if there's no God, there's no morality. There's no right and wrong. You have no determination because again, you'd have to have some sort of foundation for what makes something right and what makes something wrong. We have on the books. We know that we have free speech. Why do we have and freedom of the press? Why do we have free speech and freedom of the press? Because it's guaranteed somewhere else. It was something created. There's something made, or there's some place that we have that we can point to in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, that says we have that those rights. We don't just make it up right now. Well, I think I have the freedom of the press. We can go back to something, and something greater than ourselves. And so we'll continue next time with the next argument for God.